So in this video, I want to talk about the difference between the rhetoric that comes from Russia and the reality of what they actually do. So here, Anton Gurashenko posted this yesterday, Russian propagandists. It makes no sense for Russia to strike a children's hospital. Obviously, Ukraine did it, or better yet, a Britain who managed the air defense systems. Liars, cynical liars, and other things. Okay, so let's look at what he actually said. He actually said this: look, they don't ask a simple question. Why would Russia strike a hospital? The cost of a missile is not comparable, neither from a military nor political point of view. It has absolutely no... And what is their answer? Because Russia is a diabolical evil. That is clear. And why is Russia doing it? Because it can do it. Because that is what Russia is. It's absolute idiocy. And Orban says, come to your senses. The Russians are very pragmatic people. Why would the Russians do this? Again, we take two sides in this situation, Ukraine and Russia. But there are a lot of players here. The British, for example. You say, I think it was air defense missile that hit the hospital. It was intercepting, as the experts say, or maybe it wasn't, but it was a hit there. Okay, look, first, it was clearly a Russian missile. It was not an air defense missile. It is established, and yet they're talking about it as if, well, we just don't know. Maybe that was what it was. Like, they're trying to evade the truth, and they're willing to do this about lots of things. So how can you believe anything that they say? And I'll take the more cynical version. I have little faith that the Ukrainian was sitting at this air defense system. I can easily imagine a Briton doing it. It wasn't fired at that hospital, but upwards. It's just something that malfunctioned, and the missile fell. What about the more cynical version, that they were aiming right there? They're actually talking about that the Ukrainians were aiming at it. Like, shame on you. Like, how evil do you have to be making that kind of argument? Why not? No, the damage would have been different. And like, that's the discussion that they're having on Russian state media. And then you have guys like Che Baus, who works for RT and does reports for RT, talking about NATO, the real axis of evil. Really? Really? I mean, it's almost hard to wrap your mind around. And he says this: the Russian army was supposed to be collapsing, but it's growing, advancing, and winning in Ukraine. Well, okay, how's that working out for you? You're supposed to be running over Ukraine in about 3 weeks, and this is fairly well documented. I know trolls will say, where? Can you prove that there's 3 weeks? No. Putin thought, because it's an authoritarian system, that he was going to have the country in just a matter of weeks. And right now we're in the 41st 3-week special military operation. The Russian president was supposed to be isolated, but he just met 2 NATO leaders and including what, Orban? Really? And the presidents of the biggest manufacturing economy and biggest democracy on earth. It's true, India's going over there to get sweet oil and make some deals. The Russian economy was meant to be in tatters, but it will outgrow all other developing economies this year. That's not true. The Russian people were meant to be, and wait, since when? How are Russia a developing economy? You're supposed to be beyond that at this point. The Russian people were meant to be rebelling against Putin, but he won 80% of the votes in the election. Well, one, we knew that they weren't going to be rebelling, and two, you spent $1 billion on a rigged election? Really? Ukraine was meant to be a democracy, but it's run by a corrupt dictator who bans all opposition, oppresses the church, and discriminates against those speaking the language he grew up speaking. That sounds like Russia. In fact, that's what happens. There's this weird mirroring effect. Whatever's happening, they're projecting onto their enemies. Now, after decades of cultivating this war with Russia, NATO openly admits that they are fighting the Russians, something they denied for years. Well, yeah, they're arming the Ukrainians who are fighting against your tyrannical invasion. That's correct. But you're not fighting NATO. If you were fighting NATO, this would be a whole different story. $1 billion disinformation machine, that's what Russia's doing. Oh, no, he's saying is the Western mainstream media. I mean, the mirror imaging is just fascinating. Deeply infiltrated and controlled by Western intelligence, peddles these lies and myths to you. The bigger the lie, the more people believe it. Well, this might be the only true statement in this whole narrative here, but that's what they're projecting, and they're projecting it for a reason. Okay, Chris Owicki talks about the authoritarian nature of the regime, and this is really telling and helpful to understand what's going on. Russia's war effort in Ukraine is still hampered by lying commanders, corrupt bureaucrats, ineffective military-industrial complex, lack of defenses and against drones, and chronic shortages of men and equipment, according to Russian journalist and military commentator. Well, Ukraine's suffering from some of those maladies as well, if we're going to be fair, especially if the more Soviet the mentality of the commander, the more you might see a lying commander or corrupt bureaucrat or ineffective, from corruption or something along those lines. But it's less than what you see in Russia. This guy here is an ultranationalist journalist and commentator on Russian military affairs. He's written a lengthy complaint on his Telegram channel about the state of the Russian war effort. He says it's leading to massive and unnecessary losses on the Russian side. Now, he wants Russia to win, and he's complaining about this. After castigating the indifference of officials and the man on the street, whom he says is waiting for friend Trump to give the order to end the war, so they're counting on Trump to actually make some kind of deal. He complains that any initiative, any business drowns without a trace in the bureaucratic swamp because they have a history of this corruption. And it's far worse in Russia. It's there in Ukraine, but it's far worse in Russia. The average official, he says, doesn't give a blank about anything except his own pocket, his own chair, and the will of his superior. Well, that's what happens in an authoritarian system. You look out for yourself, and you're kissing up to the boss, and as long as the boss is happy and you have your position, you're okay. This is true in Western business organizations as well, just as much as it is. It's just the scale is much different. But the office, the boss, and the corporate solidarity are everything. The Russian military's culture of lying in military reports has led to the mass slaughter of Russian soldiers, according to this guy. And I think that's a very fair statement. 2.5 years into the war, and at the front, lies and show-offs are still blooming like opium poppies. Like they're still thriving in that system. And some gentlemen commanders are already receiving their 3rd medal for the villages and townships taken on paper. How many dozens of times has Krinkney been declared to be captured and cleared of the enemy? Right, because they submit false reports. That happens in this kind of authoritarian system. You want to look good before the boss. You don't care how many people you sacrifice and slaughter in the process in order to get your medal. This is why Russian region offers finder's fees to residents who convince friends and family to fight in Ukraine. What are we talking about? The Republic of Tatarstan in Russia. These authorities are offering money to residents who convince their friends or relatives to help Russia wage its war in Ukraine. TV Rain and other independent Russian media have reported. Tatarstan is home to 2 million of Russia's 5.3 million Tartars. A Turkic people, such ethnic minorities have borne the brunt of Russia's war in Ukraine, with a disproportionate number being killed in battle. The Buryats, a Mongolic ethnic group from southeastern Siberia, who make up only 0.3% of Russia's population, have suffered 1.16% of its war casualties. That doesn't happen accidentally, statistically. The highest proportion among the country's ethnic groups. And so they have to do that because the war machine demands it. Tatarstan, by the way, is out here, and you get a very small number of people from either Moscow or St. Petersburg compared to Tatarstan. So that's how the war is going compared to what they're saying it is. And just a few more things. Russians have been detained in Australia over the last couple of days on espionage. And so Russia's doing bad things in other places as well. The U.S. Department of Justice published a report on Russia using AI for propaganda on its social networks. Another Russian bot farm has been uncovered in the USA. Disinformation in the EU flooded before the EU elections, according to a report. Coordinated networks of accounts spreading disinformation flooded social media in France, Germany, and Italy before the elections to the European Parliament. Dutch researchers have found the impact of these accounts is increasing at an alarming rate. We can conclude with absolute certainty that a large coordinated network of accounts was influencing the EU elections in Germany, France, and Italy. The consultancy studied 2.3 million posts from 468,000 accounts in Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands. From that data set, they identified 50,000 as accounts that spread disinformation. So they're up to these kinds of tricks. And so Russia's being a bad actor while claiming it's the good guy, and it's mind-numbing. But you need to see the whole picture in order to see what's exactly going on. I thought this meme was appropriate because it helps understand how propaganda works. Putin saying, I just denazified the moon, but there's no Nazi on the moon. You're welcome. Okay, tell me what you thought about this. What am I missing? How can I help answer more questions? Put that in the comments below. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.